All right, so thanks everyone for spending your Saturday afternoon here listening to us talk about a bunch of things. So what's this talk going to be about? So as a part of this, we kind of want to dissect where we stand today on the chapter of token utilization and token distribution. And more importantly, where does the application layer sit in between that chapter? So with that, let's kick it off. But before we do, I want to ask you some questions. So just quick show of hands, who here in the room owns tokens in their wallets? Cool. Keep your hands raised. Who actually actively uses those tokens, either by a function of staking, delegating, or voting in the networks that they're a part of? Okay, nice. That's actually better than I thought, because my segue was going to be what we're kind of observing in the industry is a separation between, active token holders versus those that are kind of passively token holding. I'm really happy that we have a representative sample of the ones that are doing it the right way, but we still do see this kind of separation, and it's a hurdle to adoption. So let's kind of dissect and have a quick recap. So what have we seen, in the kind of era of token utilization, token distributions? So let's talk about, era one, we kind of dub it the Wild West. Why? Because everyone remembers how those times have kind of shaked out and where they are today. So 2012 to 2018, the introduction of smart contract platforms and, the ICO of Ethereum and kind of the ICO craze that followed it. It was an era of, a lot of innovation in early stages of kind of the design of incentive mechanisms that support those protocols, and largely speaking, no regulation to kind of determine how the sound and most effective and compliant ways of doing so. So within that context, at very early stages of kind of immature tech at many points. So what we've kind of done is, dissect the themes of that era and kind of the questions that people ask. So first off, what even is a token? What purpose does it serve and what does it facilitate? Now, where can I buy that thing? Who offers me a platform to get access to owning and acquiring it? Can I use it? Most of the time, most networks weren't at a stage of having, launched to mainnet with, a token function that had full utility. So then the next question kind of was, how do I transfer it and where do I go to trade it, right? Kind of segueing into what we think is kind of the next era, and we're kind of going to dive into this, the age of use. We kind of call it that as we've seen an evolution of maturation in the technologies that we see in protocols that are now ready to launch to mainnet, and tokens actually have utility for token holders. We've seen fewer token launches, part of that in response to increases in regulatory scrutiny that haven't necessarily been brought out in tandem with actual regulatory guidance explicitly around how things are to be done. There's a lot of kind of progression happening in that space, and as most of you have probably seen, the SEC Commissioner Hester Pierce has brought out an interesting proposal around how the future of that can look. We're seeing increase in maturation in tech, and most importantly, the rise of proof of stake, which we're going to dissect a little further down the line. So now that we've kind of entered that chapter, what are the new questions that people are asking now that you can actually use the thing that you just bought? How do I use it, and what do I use it for, and where do I go to use it?
So let's kind of talk about how the ecosystem is currently expanding throughout this chapter of chapter 1 to chapter 2. There's been a lot of different things that have been spun up and have grown, some of which are in unison, but also some of which are in opposite directions, but ultimately everyone needs to be working together. So let's kind of talk about how we got to proof of stake, because it's an important, idea to discuss about participation. Blockchain started from a proof of work perspective, where participating with your tokens just wasn't structurally or design possible. Proof of stake is, in theory, by design, allows for increased participation, and it's been an interesting road to get to where we're at today. So the genesis of proof of stake is the introduction of Peercoin in 2012. The iteration of those ideas resulted in Tendermint and BitShares in 2014, which are quite important for some of the things that we're seeing today. 2017, we saw a large increase in research on the topic, not just by individuals, but by collective humans, which was a very, very interesting trend. A lot of proof of stake work was done by individuals and still is led by individuals that have the right mindset to do so, but now it's a collective research effort. So we saw a lot of work in 2017 go into Casper, FFG, and CBC, and then Aurora Boreas as well. The earlier work in Casper is now turned into ETH2, and Aurora Boreas is supposed to turn into Cardano. Who knows if it actually will. 2019 is what we categorize as implementation. And this is where we saw proof-of-stake networks go live for the first time and actually launched a mainnet and witnessed participation inside those networks that allows us to dissect it now and understand it better and draw conclusions from it. 2020 is a big year for proof-of-stake, primarily led by ETH2, which is coming, and Polkadot, probably the two biggest layer ones that right now have the roadmap set up to launch in 2020, and then we have prominent layer 2 solutions like Scale, which is a delegated proof-of-stake protocol, which serves as a scaling solution on top of Ethereum. So to digest the data a bit more, we don't have really great data metrics to show relative growth inside the blockchain aside from total value locked up. It's not the greatest metric, but it is something that we have, and it does show relative growth. So this is essentially, we've gone from 0 to today of $14.8 billion, and as the market cap of all proof-of-stake protocols that exist today. In aggregate, across all of them, we're seeing around 70% participation, which sounds great. But actually what that means is that there's loads of people who are on the supply side of these networks providing resources, and ultimately no one using the networks. Because if there were more people using the networks, then there would be more liquidity in the token, and then there would be less being at stake.
Cool. So now that we've kind of dissected this kind of exponential growth of value from 0 to $14.8 billion in market capitalization, this obviously has brought about an increased surge in business models that support these types of networks. So I think this is a pretty good illustration of what has emerged in the context of that, which is the delegate work entity. It's a super diverse category of stakeholders that play a critical role in enabling proof-of-stake network security by providing the infrastructure to support the networks. There's broad categories, those who have staking as a service native to their business models. We're going to dig into that a little bit more, but this is kind of like the larger broad base of stakeholders that are forming around that, and then custodians and exchangers are kind of the new kids on the block, offering staking services across certain networks. And an interesting kind of evolution is, what is the role of the venture capitalist in this entire system? And something that's really interesting is actually the evolution of, what role does the capital provider play in these systems? And we've seen an interesting Web3 business model evolution where the capital provider is also becoming the work providing entity, and other interesting VC models such as that we've seen in multi-coin capital. So what is all of that kind of translated into the trends that we observe in token distribution models that are conducive to achieving kind of design goals of, enabling token launches and network launches that are as compliant and regulatory sound as possible, ensuring that networks that launch to mainnet, especially proof-of-stake networks that have a really important consideration in the initial launch and distribution of tokens to bootstrap and secure the network. And one of the interesting things kind of that we've seen with that is there's a relative increase and focus on things like self-selected and use-focused distribution. And what do I mean with that? We've kind of known and seen the classic, token distribution models of doing a fundraise that doesn't necessarily have like a built-in filter mechanism that deters against participants who are purely there for speculative purposes. And we've seen a range of passive airdrops with semi-questionable, active participation rates, and it's raised some concerns around the efficiency of that distribution with regards to the tokens that actually ended up being used. So interestingly enough, with what we've seen now, there's a bigger focus on interactive airdrops. I think something that we've seen with Blythe Pierce Mergelmine and new models that are proposed by people such as NewCypher with the work lock is self-selective distribution, right? Indicate your intent to participate to be rewarded with getting the tokens and being able to transfer them. So in that context, proof of use is kind of what Consensus has pioneered in that area, which is a programmable mechanism that ensures that token holders who purchase tokens or get tokens distributed to them are required to programmatically prove use before they're actually able to transfer them outside of the network. It's an interesting model. We've kind of done that with Foam last year, and it's the same model that we've kind of adapted for the distribution that we're doing for Scale in Q2 of this year. So stay tuned for that, kind of dig into that more. So well, how does the next chapter look, and what should it be called? Hopefully mainstream adoption. So how do we bridge the gap, and how long does that gap take? I think that's the question we're all kind of asking ourselves in the context of decentralized network participation and use. So what is really needed to cross the chasm, and what are kind of the hurdles to participation today? Well, on one front, obviously, the regulatory uncertainty needs to evolve into something that provides more guidance to be conducive to innovation and further exploration in the space, because obviously no one wants to end up in prison. The other three aspects are obviously general education, broadening the scope to bring more people into the space and help them understand, evaluate, and make informed decisions about it. And then addressing UX and UI frictions and the fragmentation that currently exists, especially at the application layer, which is what we're going to dive into next.
So where's the problem? Is the real question. So this is the chapter of use. There, we've displayed that use is taking place, and then we've displayed the people who are enabling use. But where's it happening at? And where's all the action? It's taking place at the application layer, but in a variety of different formats. Primarily, one of the newer, I guess, people, and one of the less liked people coming into the space by the industry is exchanges and custodians. You can think of these prominently as Binance and Coinbase. They have extremely large war chests, and they're able to productize these offerings, and they have an existing user base, and it's easy for them to implement these opportunities. We've also seen on the ledger level, which is actually quite cool, which we've really enjoyed, is if you have Tezos and you have a ledger, you have the ability to delegate inside of the native application to a variety of different validators, not a singular validator, but you are provided with optionality. There are some pros to this happening in the industry. It does lower fragmentation because you have an existing user base who is already in the system. But one of the bigger problems with participation, which is a problem that is not up to us to solve yet, but it's the problem of getting people into the system. So your Binances and your Coinbases of the world are extremely important because it allows for people to come into the system. However, there are some cons to this. We've seen essentially fairly aggressive pricing models come out of these larger players, which is actually quite disruptive to not only the smaller staking providers, which provides more decentralized security to these networks, but ultimately by getting rid of commission fees and getting rid of those incentive models inside of their platform, it potentially may threaten the network, which threatens everyone. So therefore, the incentive alignment of what they're doing on their staking pricing strategies, specifically Binance, is potentially, from a long-term perspective, like very, very unhealthy for everyone. Another trend that we've seen is network portals. So I'm a network, I'm about to launch, I have sufficient funding, I have a large crew of individuals, and what do I do with them, and how do I foster participation inside of my own network? Most of them are going down the route of building their own UI and UXs and becoming front ends. Two prominent examples are Loom and LivePeer, both of which have done a great job of the same thing, offering the token holder an opportunity to have optionality and choose their delegator as they wish. Definitely pros to this. Single interface. It also creates a very interesting competitive market dynamics between token holders and validators. It essentially allows for an increased layer of performance pressure to the infrastructure provider. If I'm on an infrastructure provider's platform and I'm only looking at what their stats and metrics are, and I don't have any relative comparison to competitors, I'm really not actually strengthening the provider to stay on top of their game. So by introducing optionality to the token holder and essentially commoditizing the infrastructure provider, it will create a very interesting competitive price dynamic, but also, in our opinion, increase security and also increase the enjoyment of the token holder to participate. There's definitely some cons to this as well, though. Again, it increases fragmentation. If I support Loom, like there's a really strong chance, and we're trying to pull data on this now to find correlations between use in different networks and where people are using. But ultimately, like if I'm deep enough in the game where I'm staking on live peer, like it's really easy for me to just get on Uniswap and get some Loom and also use it. However, I should be able to do all these things inside of the same thing instead of having to go to different platforms. So it does, again, increase fragmentation. Another part of it is that it's non-core work for a protocol team. And that's kind of one of the important things that we found out is that from a protocol team perspective, like you're here to focus on the protocol level issues that do come up. And this is essentially not a core duty for you to provide. We also have thoughts and beliefs that as things mature more, decentralized networks will have an increased pressure to decentralize themselves from different angles. When it comes to being rewarded or financial interaction with a network, we believe that networks are incentivized to not build, host, and maintain access portals to their own networks in an attempt to actually decentralize. And then finally, the staking providers. Most of these people are, to be very transparent, these have been probably the most innovative thing that's happened inside of the space. People support multiple different protocols, sometimes too many protocols, but ultimately we've seen a series of these spike up all over the world with different skill sets that have been here to help work with protocol teams on their economics, work with protocol teams on their distribution mechanisms, and work with protocol teams to ultimately bootstrap these networks from the very beginning, which is extremely important because when launching proof-of-stake networks, if you don't provide the security at the beginning, then no one's going to use the thing. So it's been extremely crucial for all of these things being brought together. One of the main pros as well at the token holder level is that it's tangible, right? We've heard about proof of stake. We know that proof of stake is live. We know that participating is easy. We know that we get rewarded for doing so. But like, who's going to make that tangible for me? Who's going to show me that from a Web 2 perspective? So that's been very, very good for users and good for the ecosystem to show people that participating is easy. However, some of the cons of this, since there's so many players popping up, because the business model makes sense, it creates fragmentation. They have increased customer acquisition costs because, again, I'm an infrastructure provider. Therefore, what should I be focusing on? I should be focusing on providing infrastructure, not building loads of different fancy front ends and building out my team to basically do non-core work. I would say that one of the things we're interested in is whether or not this decreases participation because the user is completely overloaded with optionality. They want to do the same thing inside of 8 different platforms, and we think that actually decreases the level of people getting involved with networks. So what are we poking at here? This is probably the best way to look at it and think about it. I'm a token holder. I have a portfolio. I support these networks. I want to interact with these networks, but I have 19 different applications to do so, and it just isn't really good for anyone, and it's really hurting the user. And the user, in this sense, when getting networks off the ground in the future, is one of the most important people to focus on. And this is something that we've seen in Web 2, right? It's something that we've seen over and over again. Fragmentation pops up with new ideas, and then there needs to be a consolidation of what's taking place in the application layer.
So kind of segueing into what we at Consensus and more specifically Codify have been working on. Consensus Activate is basically a platform, but kind of beyond that, it's an initiative for active user research, identifying kind of these patterns, seeing where the trends are going, and see how we can do our own part in enabling how the path to mainstream adoption can look. So from our perspective, what does this platform do at the most tangible level? It's basically a glue, right? It connects all network participants in a way that is easy, in a way that is seamless, both for the token holders and the staking providers, and creates competitive, transparent, and easy to use network bootstrapping. And the way that we do this is not necessarily just for networks that are planning to launch, which have a token distribution associated with them, but also existing networks, right? Extending across a breadth of supported networks that token holders want to interact with and want to participate in network native functions and get rewarded for doing so. So whether that is staking, delegation, voting, these are kind of the things that we're building out and support decentralized networks in offering to their user base and the relevant stakeholders that they have. So here's a really ugly graph. Not enough coffee and not enough time, but anyways, the really short TDLR is what are we trying to do here? It's basically just a connection, right? Building a connection between all of these stakeholders and allowing them to come together in a really easy to use way. Our main objective, ecosystem participants, are all the ecosystem participants that we've just spent our time talking about. So respectively, all of these should be the ones that we enable through what it is that we're doing. So for the token holders, what is it that I care about? Well, I care about getting the thing. I care about using the thing. I care about being able to make informed decisions about how to use it and who to use it through, right? And being able to do so in a really easy to use manner. Validators, or more broadly, any kind of delegate work entity that is running on a supported network for us, should have an easy to use interface where they can offer their services and get access to that kind of retail demand and distribution that is coming through for the decentralized networks that we're supporting. And then lastly, I guess our partners, the decentralized networks that we're working with. Scale is one of the first partners that we've officially announced. They're going to be doing their mainnet launch in Q2 of this year. And they've spent a really chunky amount of time to kind of roam through the details of how it looks to launch a delegated proof of stake network today and what matters from a token distribution perspective, from a validator onboarding perspective, from a bootstrapping perspective, and how to phase that out in ways that ensures and maintains early stage network security and then later stage network use. So this is kind of sneak peek of what it is and how it looks. In the easiest way, it's basically like a home, a portal, and a connection point for you to interact with the centralized networks that abstracts away from some of the frictions that we see today and hopefully provides a less fragmented space for you to come and use your tokens. So basically, use your tokens supports any type of network native functions that our supported networks have. We provide you with data-driven insights to understand what the network's general performance and health is, how validators are performing, what their uptime is, what their history is, for you to be able to execute on that decision within the platform and select who it is that you actually want to stake with. And then lastly, of course, be rewarded for participating, the core of the incentive mechanism behind all of this. So with that, I'll leave it and say thank you for spending 20 minutes on your Saturday with us. And go find out more. So activate.codify.network. Sign up if you want to hear more about the upcoming partners that we're due to announce this year. And also just catch us, ping us, telegram us if you have any questions, feedback, thoughts. We'd love to hear from you.
Do we need questions? Do we have time for questions?
Yes, we have 5 minutes.
Oh, nice.
Cool.
Yeah.
Question in the back.
A lot of government policy is moving with regards to the legality side of cryptocurrency. So, for example, government is passing policies to see whether they should tax cryptocurrency. And everybody who has cryptocurrency is interested in becoming a cryptocurrency investor. So how do you balance the advantages from holding cryptocurrency for a period of time without getting tax rate with those who don't want to become investors but actively want to use the cryptocurrency in this kind of service information?
Yeah, so I guess using in the sense of staking, we can talk about, because we've been looking into the taxation issues that exist there. I mean, essentially it's double taxation, but it's pretty much double taxation. Well, it depends. Like if you do work and you receive tokens for services rendered, there's a double taxation event that takes place. If you are staking on a network and receiving rewards for doing so, there's also a double taxation that takes place in that setting. So, if you're a holder, you pay tax based on your profits. If you're a staker, you get taxed when you receive your rewards, and then you get taxed again when you sell your rewards later. So the double taxation problem that exists. There are people who are actively working on that. The Proof of Stake Alliance is one group that is probably doing the most work on that topic. But the taxation issue, I personally don't see as being a blocker to participation, maybe with a different user type, but it's not the user type of today. But it's important for the user type of tomorrow, because if we just have the same people inside these networks using the same tokens, it's, we're in an echo chamber right now. So I would agree from a longer term perspective, the taxation problem is an issue, and However, I don't see it getting solved really anytime soon. But there are frictions to being a staker and also getting taxed on it.
Yeah.
I guess 2 questions. First would be, do you think there will be like a feature where we like rebalance geolocation of nodes or like in the future?
Yeah.
So
There-
like which network protocols actually?
Yeah, I mean, the goal there is the providers who host their services inside of Activate, the goal is to have a geolocation of not just them, but everyone. But basically, if you choose a provider, we would like for that interactive map to change to, I'm with this provider, here's where their nodes are located. And if you have a geographical preference, that's more between the token holder and the provider. We're just there to be the glue between the two of them.
It's like I wouldn't say marketing advantage, but like you could actually say like you're double helping the network by going through the portal. And then I guess my other question is, do you know if they're like based on wherever the consumer or investor actually participates from, so say from the UK, do you know if there's any like geolocation restrictions on where they can host nodes?
Yeah, I mean, from a token holder purchasing perspective, obviously there are restrictions. So who can actually participate? We do KYC anyone who participates in the launch, and there are obviously sanctioned countries that can't participate in doing so. And then there is a few set of other countries that are not supported from a money like transmission licensing perspective. We're using Wire, so obviously any country where that's deemed as explicitly illegal is a country that we're not going to be servicing for that purpose.
Not like active regulation
On node participants that you can delegate to, not as of now, but to be honest with you, like we do track. I mean, for us, the first stage of decision making is, country of incorporation for the staking providers that we support, and then I guess the second layer, which is a lot more data driven, is where are the nodes actually operated, which we haven't gotten into any legal, crosshairs for, but good point to raise, and something we may have to in the future.
It's if like let's say nodes are being hosted in like Iran. Places like that in kind of sanctioned countries, I would assume that would be an issue, but it hasn't come up yet.
Great.
Cool.
All right.
You kind of wanted to ask.
Yeah, so it was like a 25% hand raise.
Do you guys plan to like actively add platforms kind of unnecessarily with their participation, or is it like you're partnering?
So for us, it's all, it's highly like incentive alignment based. So like with everyone that we participate in. So for the networks we support, they don't pay us in fiat, they pay us in native assets, because we believe that you have to have skin in the game to be incentivized to like maintain this thing for basically eternity, right? So same with the partners like on the validator front who we support. Obviously, like we're trying to help them with their business and in turn like enabling the marketplace or the platform that we're providing. So it's more of a partnership type business model in general. Thank you.